of December, I imagine, is when the holiday break will be. But I just wanted to mention a few things really quickly. On the 15th of this month is La Bab Du Chen. So La means deity, like as in the deity realms, and Bap means to come down. So it's the Buddha's descent from heaven day when he went to teach his mother in one of the Deva realms. And it's one of the, I believe, the 4 most important days on the Buddhist calendar. So we're not doing huge, but we do have a few things. So in the morning, there's going to be the precepts from Geshe. I know there's a time zone thing, so we always include a link to take those precepts with a recording from Lama Zopa Rinpoche for people who are in different time zones. And Geshe will also give Lung an oral transmission of this mantra of dependent arising, Om Ye Dharma, the one that starts like that. So yeah, so Dave requested that, especially because we have some new folks that are coming in who maybe haven't received that and would benefit. So yes, we will have, so that will be on the 15th, I believe, right, Dave? Is it the 15th of this month? I should just check the calendar myself. Where did I put that? Make sure. Yeah, so it's the 15th. And so there'll be a session in the morning, and then in the evening, I'll lead just a very short practice of Buddha Shakyamuni according to the sadhanas of the Kadampa, the Buddha's word is instruction lineage. And that will be just an hour, but with some nice reflection and visualization of the Buddha. So that's how we'll be marking that holy day. In terms of people who haven't taken the precepts before and maybe wonder what it's about, you're basically keeping kind of a very careful ethical lifestyle for the duration of the day, almost living in a monastic way, so like an ideal monastic way. So that means not eating after noon. It means avoiding the pungent plants, meat, eggs, and so forth. It means, you know, we're not watching entertainment, not sleeping on a high bed, and so forth. Dave always links something on our webpage about those if you're interested. There was one more thing I wanted to say, right? Recently, one of my Tibetan teachers who sometimes tunes in and watches us, he asked me to translate in the first person. He thinks that that will improve the quality of translation for everyone. So instead of saying Geshe says this and Geshe says that, basically, I'm just going to use I in the first person. And we'll see how it goes. I think people are going to notice this change. That's why I'm mentioning it. Yesterday, I tried it and I got positive feedback from 2 people, but I don't know how the rest of the people thought. But anyways, we'll try it today. If this is something that people don't like, just let me know and we can change back. But I just thought to try this way of doing things because this friend of mine, I respect him a lot, and I think it might help to improve the quality. So as always, I welcome your feedback. And having said that, I won't keep you waiting any longer. Grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, get comfortable, and we'll invite Geshe down and get started. So let's try to avoid my usual musical chairs. Can everyone see both Geshe and I and hear me clearly? Okay, excellent. So first of all, Tashi Dele, greetings to everyone. I hope that you are well and I hope that you are happy. And as always, we need to have this awareness, we need to have this appreciation of how fortunate we are, of our good fortune. So why are we fortunate? This goes back to our understanding of the sameness of all of the 6 different types of beings within samsara, within cyclic existence. And that basic wish is to be free from even the slightest suffering and to be able to experience every single happiness. And the work, the task that we are engaging in today helps us to accumulate the causes to be able to actualize that wish. It is for that reason that we are supremely fortunate. So when we talk about that we call the self, or that we call my mind, then we know that by engaging in these practices as much as possible, we will be able to reach the fully perfected state, the sort of most evolved that I or that self can be. And so what more of a wonderful task is there than that? And this is yet another reason that we are so supremely fortunate. And also, and also when we aim towards this perfect happiness, we understand that from aiming towards that perfect happiness, as a natural result of that, all of that temporary happiness is achieved anyways. So all of the practices that one engages in with this aim in mind, we understand that naturally, it definitely has benefits for this lifetime as well. So we need to have this idea that we are accumulating the causes for happiness. We are building this foundation stone for happiness. And that as we place this foundation stone for happiness, we need to make sure that we get rid of all of the possible hindrances, the possible obstacles to being able to place that. So because it is So because the quality of the mind is connected with the quality of the body, then what we are going to do is we're going to engage in a breathing contemplation, breathing out all of the discursive thoughts and stale air, and breathing in what is wholesome and good. So we are to be like a child who first visits a beautiful, ornate temple, kind of gazing at all inequality and wonderment. We are not focusing on any single object, but on the whole. So the child, when he walks or she walks into that beautiful ornate temple, they just appreciate the beautiful whole. We're not worried about distinguishing, differentiating each tiny object within the temple. And then think the nature of my mind is illuminated like the sun. It is pure and uncovered in the nature of vastness. So just like when the sun illuminates the earth, we are able to perceive every object. When we bring forth the nature of this mind's luminosity, we understand that it will allow us to be able to discern things and clear away ignorance. Once we are able to clear away misunderstandings and misapprehensions of things and be able to understand things as they really are, on the basis of building that knowledge, we can slowly clear away ignorance. And in order to be able to achieve that, we request the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas for their blessings. And we make this request from the very depths of our mind. In other words, the bottom of our heart. Yeah. Chonde
Geshe Sheba Da Chumba Yong Da Ba Zube Sanje Sheba Da Shasu Demba Dewa Sheba Jide Jemba Jebu Dove Kalu Gyowa Lana Meba Ladong Ni Nongi Temba Sanje Chonden De Pejawa Shaja Duwa La Chasu Lo Cheda Jasu
Do a short mandala offering. Refuge and bodhicitta.
Sanje Jedo Zoja Jono La Jongshu Bardu Dani Gyazuchi Dagi Jeje Jibe Zono Je Jola Benjir Sanje Joba Jo Sanje Jedon Zoja Jono La Joju Bardu Dani Gyazuchi Dagi Jeje Jibe Sono Je Jola Benjir Sanje Joba Jo Sanje Jedon Zoja Jono La Jongshu Bardu Dani Gyazuchi Dagi Jeje Jibe Sono Je Jola Benjir Sanje Joba Jo. Wata tenga ta ngarosu to ya tombo kni thopa shos manuji ta ngarosu do kasangine te kaware na na setsa chimbode tombe kni ude chika tomba yede zuka tomba tele so ta ngazol hele ngene teres.
So first explaining the beginning by way of the two bodies. We talked about this I or this self, and in terms of getting it to that result, to that destination where we said that we wanted to go, how is that result achieved? It is achieved through the two bodies, through the Dharmakaya or the truth body and the Rupakaya or the form body.
Rude chika tomba yede zuka tomba setuas wata te isas yang eni noni yede zuka tomba te toja ke zo te yong a shabala rude chika tomba te mari moto na isa wata te ni tres.
So we understand that it is through the Dharmakaya, the truth body, that one achieves one's own welfare, and it is through the Rupakaya, the form body, that one achieves the welfare of others. In terms of the main one, in terms of importance, it is working for others through the Rupakaya, the form body. However, without the attainment of the Dharmakaya, it is not possible to bring forth the Rupakaya. Therefore, the Dharmakaya is also essential.
Wata te ta te ni ka sanan de so wata thaba no ne thaba ya shu ne si ji za te yong a shabala ane thmoi thaba sanan de tni pge thoya ke 다 손서 땜버지고 그나스.
And so we understand that the achievement of the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya, the form and truth bodies, this is the supreme liberation. It is the uncommon liberation. So one has to understand how to distinguish and how to strive towards that.
어다 대용하셔 봐라 나로서 니 전에 코알 다 가디나 대바 이는 꼬라지 콜로코와 뭐지 진데 대바 이는 조야 맞이 다대 그게 깔래 가야지 그런 거 아니에요.
And also we need a feeling of weariness, a feeling of tiredness from samsara, which is like a wheel, constantly turning on this wheel again and again and again. We need to feel tired to bring forth that striving.
그래서 어다 디야 대화 디야 니자 초초라 대화 여기서 매비서 같은데 가디나 꼬꼬라지 않는 배도 때문에 와서.
So we understand that samsara, cyclic existence, can't bring lasting benefits because those moments of happiness, right, they're just part of that whole range of experiences. They're not lasting, and we just keep turning and turning upon that wheel.
언니네 나서 한테 소소소소 제와 요시요 제와 언니네 요나 나 특이야 그게 로토바지.
So we often, there's often a question that's raised about, well, what about compassion for myself? Well, what about compassion for me? Well, if you have real compassion for yourself, then don't you want to achieve that lasting freedom, that true freedom of lasting happiness?
그래서 어다 들리지 자다 들리게 다 타와 되는 걸로 뒷눈에 타와 야수 되는 걸로 다
So we have to bring forth this mind that strives towards liberation before being able to actualize it. That is very important. But to bring forth that striving towards liberation, which is a virtuous mind, we understand that because it is virtuous or wholesome, naturally obstacles are going to arise to that. So we need to prepare our mind by placing it in a peaceful, relaxed state to mitigate those obstacles. So it's just like dropping a stone in a still surface of water. We know that at first, those ripples will emanate out, but then they will go back into the smooth stillness of the water. This is what we want to do with those discursive or distracting thoughts. Through minimizing those useless thoughts or those unwholesome projections, think that I have achieved a state of calm, of peacefulness within my mind. On the basis of that, the body also feels stable, peaceful, and well. From the sphere of emptiness, that empty space in front of us, imagine that the deity Green Tara appears before you.
And 그때 그런다고 춘주지 rundra니 바시 소소가 아니 미소가 처치 되듯이 이제 좀 그때 그런다고 그 춘주지 생겨내신데 미소가 돼 미소.
And then imagine that from this large Tara in front of oneself, a smaller replica of Tara appears and takes place just at eye level, right in front of you at eye level.
끝에 싸워도 간지 그게 너무지
Do your best to make that tara that's at about the level of your eyes, just in front of you, clear and vivid, clear and vivid.
사찰에 가는 게 바빠지 쉬체가 있는 거 알겠어. 게 바이면 또 뭐지 쉬체가 가리는 거.
And as we emphasize the clarity aspect of tara, it is said that when we develop clarity, distraction is more of the danger that's going to arise in the mind. So just be aware of whatever distraction may have arisen.
내가 소화 쉬체가 가리나요. 그 뒤처럼 되는 하는 거는 또 세트도 메인에서
So if objects of attachment are arising, for example, just bring forth the resolve that I'm going to hold my meditation object of tara, clarity, and I'm not going to veer towards the distraction of those objects of attachment.
되네 어떤지 그 끝에만 대에서 이제 와서는 전레션 대기 되어라. 이제 좀 끝에 대위 되어라. 그렇게 되는 게 당연히 저를 봐. 다 대위 되어라. 가지고 대화.
And then imagine
니까 하세요. 손도
And then imagine that tara that we've been developing clarity with at the eyebrow level, we now visualize her at the navel level for stability.
니자 때문에
We want to have a stable comprehension of that image of tara.
뭐지 시험을 봐서 가는 거는 세트 뒤처럼 시적이나 볼 수 있는 거 지금 있는
When we're developing the stability aspect of our object of meditation, in this case, tara, it is said that when we're developing stability, it's more likely that the faults of laxity will arise. So just think, I'm not going to drift off into laxity. I'm going to avoid doing that.
내가 어떤 일이 쓰였다요. 이제 너무 같은 거라서 더자 타든지
And have this awareness that this aspect of Venerable Tara, she actually embodies what we are trying to achieve as our final object of attainment.
세계 통치 대주기 시대들은 지금 너무 갖고 또 같이 소리 주세요.
And then bring forth bodhicitta thinking, may I achieve the enlightened state of Venerable Arya Tara, so as to be able to lead all sentient beings to supreme happiness. Meditate on bodhicitta.
지그시하시게 소소히는 세계시에 대해는 우리 점에 된데도 그래.
When we engage in Dharma activities, it's important to remember that when we talk about the qualities of the mind and the faults of the mind, neither of those exist from their own side. Neither of them are inherently existent. And it is for this reason that change is possible, and we definitely can achieve this resultant enlightened state.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll pause there.
Other logic is we are society was me took a job in such a future in Grace. And tell you budget the Gabag budget future was.
So Geshe said that he presented this visualization to you at these two different levels, because when we are visualizing Tara like at the eyebrow level in the place in front of us, we're emphasizing clarity, and at that time it's more likely that distraction will arise. And so when we're visualizing her closer to the navel level, that's to develop, rather than vividness or clarity, that's developing stability. But at that moment when we're developing stability, we're more likely to fall into laxity. So Geshe just wanted to give you a feel for those two things.
And so
Geshe said and so the other thing is that when we are visualizing at these various levels, we're speaking about an internal process within the mind, right? Even though we might mention a physical location, we understand that this image is arising within the mind. And so in order to be able to achieve this state of Buddhahood for beings, we need a method which is complete. And in this way, then we will begin our discussion of the text. And so in terms of our study and practice, we sometimes feel that we are not bringing forth realization. So what is the main reason that we are not able to experience those realizations? It's because of unwholesome karma and obscurations. The unwholesome karma and obscurations that we've accumulated. Correct. And so when we are meditating upon love, upon compassion, or any aspect of the path, our ability to hold that object of focus, to hold that object of meditation single-pointedly, this is an important cause. One could even say the substantial cause of the realization. However, although that may be a very important cause, it is not the singular cause. It is not the only cause. We know this, for example, from when Manjushri instructed Lama Tsongkhapa that in order to be able to bring forth realization, he should engage in the practices of accumulation of merit and purification of obscurations. And then along with that, Manjushri also advised making requests and supplications to the gurus and deities, understanding them as being of inseparable nature. And so then with this third factor in place, this will help one to more efficiently develop realizations. Yeah. Yeah. So then younger Sonam. And so as Lama Tsongkhapa kind of cultivated these instructions of Manjushri, he was able to come to this understanding of how dependent arising acts as a assisting factor in the realization of emptiness, and how also when one is cultivating emptiness, this is an assisting factor in developing dependent arising. So along with the practices of accumulation of merit, the purification of negativities, and making requests to the Guru deity, understanding them as inseparable, this accompanies the main cause of the actual application in meditation on that object for realization. And then so for that reason, because accumulation and purification is very important, we engage in the practice of these 7 branches or 7 limbs, which is where we are in our text. And so in terms of what we've covered already, we covered just 2 of the 7. We covered the limb of prostration and the limb of making offerings. And so that brings us to the 3rd branch or the 3rd limb, which is the confession of negativities. Every harmful action I have done with my body, speech, and mind, overwhelmed by attachment, anger, and confusion, all these I openly lay bare before you. Yeah. And so then when we are reciting these words of the confession of negativities, whose negativities are we talking about? We're talking about our own. We are confessing our own negativities. So once again, I'm sorry to say this, but it's kind of like I have to say this. This is the translation we're using, so it's much improved than the one I had, but there's a word that's missing here that's really important. Individually. I confess individually all negative actions. And this is crucial to Geshe-la's commentary. I'm not pointing this out to be like shady or anything, but it's coming in the commentary, so I have to point it out. Sorry. So Geshe-la is saying when I say they confess the misdeeds individually, what does that mean? It means the individual misdeeds from, for example, the different types of vows that we have contravened. Then they also the dompa sungi Geshe-la's like it's there. Geshe-la's like it's there in the root text. I'm like I know, but it's not there in the English. So there's a way when we think about this, when we say I confess individually all of these negative actions, we can think about the 3 types of vows. We can think about the pratimoksha, the vows of individual liberation. We can think of the bodhisattva vows, and we can also think of the tantric or secret mantra vows. So each of those, you can think of the individual infractions that you may have incurred, and you can confess them in that moment. And so when we speak about the vows of individual liberation or pratimoksha, one of the things that's spoken about really, especially in relation to that, is cultivating the confession by way of the 4 opponent powers. And similarly, fortnightly monks and nuns, for example, they'll engage engage in the practice of sojong, which is like the vow recitation. And that helps them to purify any infractions of their vows of pratimoksha or individual liberation.
다 된다. 저대다리야 나로서 자타바도 아니 이네 많이 바이는 서도 세이나 다님보 또지대 거기 차송아 스피치 또 더바이나 다야서도 소다가 도마던가 이번 뭐지 다요 아레스.
And so whether we are a layman or a laywoman, or whether we are a monk or a nun, actually through the practice of confessing our infractions by way of the four opponent powers, we can purify any transgressions related to those pratimoksha vows.
domba mio gari nyapasha sana mamasha tel dipasha tel Geshe. Geshe.
Yeah.
아니 심한 도세 때문에 대니데 다 같이 못 들어가래스.
So Geshe said that when we're confessing the individual negativities, there's two things that are really important. The first is a mind of regret for the negative action. And the second is a mind of sort of like holding back, restraining oneself. These two are very, very important.
어다 때네 대목이 때네 때네서 아셔 마도가 이나요. 내가 뭐 파송하지는 많이 받지 뭐 발라바 이나요. 예바티 코로 슈처 만도 오베도 지나시라레스.
Mila parla.
송하지는 많이 오게 제바트네 제수 잡으려 마스나 వచ్చ이라바 이나요. 대존지우 코로 예바티 되지. And
so another thing that is said to help with the purification is if one does not conceal one's fault. So concealing is knowing that we have accumulated the fault, trying to hide it for others. If on the other hand, we're honest about the transgression, for example, if we tell somebody about that, laying bare that fault rather than concealing, this can also aid us in purification.
So
if we think I've accumulated this fault, but I'm going to just make sure that no one else ever knows about it, on the basis of that, actually the weight of the fault, the weight of the unwholesomeness of the fault, this is said to greatly increase, right? So we shouldn't do that. So in terms of an antidote for purifying any transgressions in relation to the bodhisattva vows, one of the things that's recommended is to recite the verses for receiving those bodhisattva vows again. So this is very important. We can recite the verses for receiving the bodhisattva vows again, and this can purify transgressions related to the bodhisattva vows. So then Geshe said also one of the main benefits of receiving empowerments and initiations is that as we go through those steps of the ritual, we are able to again receive the bodhisattva vows. And on the basis of doing that, especially right in that group context, then the transgressions of those bodhisattva vows are healed and they can be strengthened and repaired. And so there are many reasons that the holy beings engage in the practice of repeatedly taking the bodhisattva vows, right? And so just as they emulate that, we actually have the very same opportunity in our hand to be able to do that if we make the resolve. So in terms of purifying the vows of secret mantra, so how does one purify the vows of secret mantra? In this particular instance, it's the practice of the dakjuk, the self-entry or self-initiation, which is recommended for purifying the vows of secret mantra. So this is the importance of at every harmful action I have done, I lay these open before you individually. And I'm sorry to say it again, but that word individually is really important.
Magi gone so be dipa kanga, each gone so be dipa kanga, so I had this.
And so when we do this also, Geshe said, another thing that we can bring forth in our mind is that we are confessing individually all of the negativities accumulated by body. We are confessing individually all of the negativities accumulated by speech, and we are confessing individually all of the negativities accumulated by mind.
This one, dipa dog, dipa on this one. That thing, the Karala in the dipa de Ungulare Zalabaina, and in the chog, Ungi, Hakadarawa, and in Yan Licha, and in dipa, Magi dipa, each dipa.
Yeah.
And Yadora, Yadoga Ungi Tenemu, yes, the Mugu Ungi, Otalima is a dipa Karina, what that is.
So as we go through the verse, you'll see in the third line, overwhelmed by attachment, anger, and confusion. So how can we make sure that we confess individually the negativities accumulated under the power of each of those afflictions? We think in this way: due to attachment, I've engaged in these unwholesome deeds of body, of speech, of mind. Due to anger, I've engaged in these unwholesome deeds of body, speech, and mind. Due to confusion or ignorance, I've engaged in these negativities of body, speech, and mind.
Oh, that is Latin, the Pasaya, to me, Ungi, no stage, and what Roman tissue, dash one, and it's on nice.
So overwhelmed by attachment, anger, and confusion. Geshe said that, this shows that you have actually were powerless. You were overcome by those afflictions and you were sort of compelled towards those negativities. So that's what's being pointed at here.
This one, what this way, or this Dipa dog, Dipa Chipa, Satonola, Hakosarawa, and Dipa the Soso Shapa, Miss Shapa. You want to Soso with any Yada Shipa. You want to Yada Shia, the Soso Jesse Shapa.
And also when we think about other negativities that we have accumulated in terms of the perspective of the action, they're the negativities of the actions that we have done ourselves. They're the negativities that we accumulate due to the unwholesome actions that we've compelled others to do. And there's the negativity that we accumulate due to the unwholesome actions of others that we have rejoiced in.
This one, or that you are so miss like a Masheva yelling one near the Tama, Tomata, Ja, Tum, Kaze Temabaina, Tiu Mata Kaze Sebaina, Kaze Sebaina, Yabakanga Suzola.
So Mijanda di Parkam. And so it is said that, for example, if you order another person to kill, for example, during a war, to kill other human beings, or indeed to kill any type of sentient beings, then if they kill 100, if they kill 1,000 and so forth, you actually accumulate all of that negativity, being the one who uttered the order, right? Who compelled them to do that. And so in terms of whether the soldier who you compelled to kill all those people, whether they accumulate all of that negativity or not, the complete negativity, that is determined really by whether they actually had the wish to engage in that action themselves in a complete way, or whether they did it only because they had to, only because the order was issued. So for example, those people who are compelled to go into war and to kill the enemy by their superiors, but if they don't want to go to war and they didn't have any wish, right, but they're just doing it because they had to or for survival, they do get a negative karma, but they don't get the complete negative karma of killing, for example.
So when we
speak about any negativity or unwholesome karma that we accumulate, we understand that this is accumulated through one of the three doors, and those three doors are the doors of body, speech, and mind. And in terms of the motivation or the intention, right? The motivation or the intention determines whether that negativity engaged within body, speech, or mind becomes complete or not. Sometimes the action will be complete and sometimes it will not. And so, for example, those who are butchering like goats, sheep, and other animals and so forth, if they have a very kind of strong motivation to engage in that action and then also rejoice in it or think that it's a good thing, that means that there is a powerful accumulation of negative karma there. And also there are those who have a really overwhelming attachment to wearing furs or to meat and so forth. And so because of that overwhelming attachment, they engage in killing, right? This also becomes a heavy negative karma due to that attachment. So Geshe said also when there is like a process of killing, for example, when a human being is killing another human being and that human being isn't dying and they're getting frustrated or they're getting angry, and then with anger they engage in even more actions to kill that person, then this becomes a very kind of heavy negativity due to that affliction of anger. And so Geshe said whether it's due to attachment or whether it is due to aversion or anger, that the act of killing itself, we understand that operating behind either of those is also a fundamental ignorance, right? Yeah. And so in terms of the motivation, if the motivation is influenced by these three of attachment, anger, or confusion, this is said to add to the weight of the negativity of killing and so forth. So this is weighty by way of the motivation, attachment, anger, and confusion. So when we think about unwholesome karma, and also when we think about afflicted minds, they are both said to possess one positive aspect, and that is, for example, from the point of view of karma, if we confess that karma and engage in purification, we can clear it away. So negative karma can be purified. That is its one positive aspect. In terms of the afflictions, such as attachment, anger, and so forth, if we cultivate the antidotes to those afflictions, they can be diminished and cleared away. So this is said to be the one sort of quality of the afflictions. Duke. And so another thing that we can do, Geshe said, when we're engaging in the practice of confession and when the mind is relaxed and stable and we have a bit more time, we can think of some of the instructions to be like a person who has eaten poison, and understanding this is a very serious thing. We want to confess that negativity immediately. Another thing we can do is if we're a person who is about to eat poison, right? We stop ourselves, understanding the poisonous nature of that negative action, and in that way restrain ourselves. So we understand that, like, from in terms of accumulating negativities, right? That's not something that we're going to die right away from, but we understand that it is something that is destroying positivity, and in that way, it is a bit like eating poison. And another awareness that's really important to have is when we talk about the I or the self, even in this lifetime, definitely there's none of us that are completely without unwholesome karma. We've definitely all accumulated some measure of unwholesome karma. But if we have not committed a grave misdeed, if we have not done something really terrible, just because we haven't done it in this lifetime does not mean that we haven't done it in previous lifetimes. So also, right, when we engage in the confession and purifications of negativities, we want to do that for previous lifetimes as well.
Oda tendigu tara pageshya shawang yambasana madi tiba sono momo to ne shamba go ni jigo so se go to mani go na that impakale me vas page tende do to hash tende was.
And also when we think about those negativities accumulated in this and previous lifetimes, and then we cultivate the antidote by bringing forth minds of love, compassion, and meditation on emptiness, we will definitely be able to diminish that negativity.
Oda nyembo to chishu de da nyembo yashu de ta to mani go ya ta page zo ji was tene so ju se shamba chimbo ni ji chimbo ta se me jala so kar go go rendo asana.
And so the very most powerful antidote is the meditation on emptiness, which can eradicate those negativities, but also combined with that, very powerful minds that can bring forth purification like love, compassion, bodhicitta, the four immeasurables or boundless thoughts, and so forth.
Oda tsu yu tisa do gre dwa yu tishu do gre sergio tombas ko ha bochin ki bochin pasu was.
And the holy beings instruct us that not only do we purify negativities through bringing forth these minds, negativities and obscurations, but they are also the basis of a great accumulation of merit. So we're achieving both of those.
Oda trichin sono to yare dus de chashi to tume wonga no lido ma to teje yi ji chu right?
So then we just make this confession by reciting this verse. Every harmful action I have done with my body, speech, and mind, overwhelmed by attachment, anger, and confusion, all of these I openly lay bare individually before you.
Akosara ta le kaze so yo ba yina yo le de yo are tene mi pa de yo are tene tele sabe tele chme chedo le mena sabe ti indigo shi do ma shi to ma was
Ti jiangchi ki semdam company niga ke.
what ya tu mani to shoni se ti de no so na so is.
And it is said that, in fact, if one can bring forth the realization of bodhicitta, or if one can bring forth the realization of wisdom realizing emptiness, that on that basis, it is not as if the seeds of that negative karma are completely eliminated or that they disappear, but the seeds of those negative karmas completely lose their power. They are not able to bring forth a result. It is akin to like a seed being scorched by fire and not being able to sprout. So once again, these minds of bodhicitta and emptiness are extremely important. So our samsaric body and our samsaric mind, they are within samsara, but based upon these ways of thinking, transforming our ways of thinking, we can achieve these very great things, such as this great purification. So this is really wonderful. So in the Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, when it's giving the teachings on karma, some of you are probably familiar, right, with the characteristics of karma. The first is that karma is certain, then that karma increases, and so forth. But when we say that karma is certain, Geshe said, this is a general rule, but it is not 100% the case with either wholesome or unwholesome karma. And why is there an exception in the case of unwholesome or negative karma? Because it is said that if one engages in the practice of purification, even the heavy negative karma from one of the 5 actions of immediate retribution, so killing one's father, killing one's mother, and so forth, even that can be purified. So this is an exception to the certainty of karma connected with unwholesome karma. And similarly with wholesome karma, right? Those virtuous causes that we accumulate, they are certain, but there is an exception. What's the exception there? If we bring forth a strong mind of anger and so forth, right? The power of that virtue can be diminished. So that's an exception to how karma is certain with regards to wholesome actions.
Then Gawa, other day, Sakarina,
So Geshe said one of the ways that we can protect our positive karma is when we are engaging in the wholesome action, we understand that the agent, the person engaging, so oneself, is empty of inherent existence. The action, the wholesome action itself, is empty of inherent existence, and the recipient of that wholesome action is empty of inherent existence. When one reflects in this way, it is said to protect that negative karma from being diminished by the arising of anger. So Geshe said that this is kind of like a hidden meaning behind some of the words in the scriptures. So for example, if we think of the Umalajupa, the Majjhimakāvatara, entering the middle way, it talks about the merits of actions of generosity and so forth being dissipated by anger, but it does not talk about the merits of wisdom being dissipated by that anger. So the hidden reason behind that is what we just discussed. So what is the reasoning for this? Let us unpack this a little bit. Most of the negative actions that we are engaging in, the vast majority, are related to the afflictions of attachment or aversion arising. And we understand that operating behind that attachment and aversion is the ignorance grasping at the self. When we meditate on emptiness, however, the emptiness is the direct antidote to the ignorance grasping at the self, which is the root of all afflictions, including those that arise due to anger, due to attachment and aversion. So when one meditates on emptiness, the merits of that are the direct antidote to ignorance grasping at the self, the root of all the afflictions. Therefore, how could those subsidiary afflictions of attachment or anger dissipate it, right? They won't be able to dissipate that positive karma. And another way also to kind of sort of flesh out our practice of confession is to think about all of the negativities of the 10 non-virtuous actions that we may have engaged in. We can confess those individually. And even if we don't engage in the completion of the action, engage in the action directly, just the power of the minds behind the action, those minds of kindness, also those minds of unkindness. There are many stories in the scriptures of even how the karma from the arising of a kind mind or the arising of a mind of anger, how that can lead to a result. So when we talk about accumulating karma, right, we often say karma translates as action, right? But also the ways of thinking, right? The thinking that we engage in, it also accumulates karma. So there are some stories related to this, and if there is the opportunity, perhaps we can share them later on.
다지와 이세연이야라 그렇죠?
So the next one is the branch of rejoicing, the branch of rejoicing.
투지 자와거도 순지세 우자노도 로도 말로도 가와 근데 세노고나요 대다 근데 지세다 여론
I lift up my heart and rejoice in all positive potential of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions, of solitary realizers, hearers still training in those beyond, and of all ordinary beings.
어다 노지토 솔로오자야 비게 그냥 되게 그렇게 지세연은 공비가라 부자가 이게와라 지세연와 사티가 다다다 들신도스
So when we talk about the practice of rejoicing in virtue, one of the ways of describing this practice of rejoicing in virtue is rejoicing in the virtue of 5 types of beings. And actually, that is what is being done in this verse here.
어다 지세연은 공비가라 다야 세나 접어서 뭐가 가세 터득하게 자치 모셔도는 소설 계속 침묵하게 하래
And we think about these different types of beings, Geshe said, because when we're engaging in the practice of rejoicing, it's almost like we want to be a little bit greedy. We want to include the merits of as many different types of beings in that rejoicing as we possibly can.
쇼지 자와 거도 세리잖니 쇼지 자와 거도 세리 그 사람은 자와 거 디스가 자와 거 세리가레스
Yeah. So the Sanjakurwa. So actually so Geshe is glossing. It's actually of the victors, but Geshe is just saying victors means Buddhas, but that's how it's translated anyway. So you see that. So the first type of positivity that we're rejoicing in is that of Buddhas. And then we are also rejoicing in the positive actions of the children of the Buddhas. So that is the Bodhisattvas, which is also how it appears here. And also the solitary realizers, so those beings that strive in a solitary way to achieve liberation for themselves alone, to achieve individual liberation, all the positive deeds of those solitary realizers. Here's still training in those beyond. So that means the hearers that are still training and those that have completed their training. So the 2 types of hearers or shravakas rejoicing in their merits as well. And when we speak of a hearer beyond learning, Geshe said, we are speaking of a hearer solitary realizer. When we speak about a hearer still training, right, they haven't reached the path of no more learning. They're on the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, and so forth. So it's okay with this. So ordinary beings are all of those beings who have not yet entered, right, like the 5 paths or the actual spiritual path and so forth. So really lifting up our heart and thinking of all of those beings, right, the spiritual beings, the ordinary beings, rejoicing in every last of those virtues. So Lama Tsongkhapa gave as a reply in terms of the type of virtue that requires little effort, is easy to practice, and has a vast accumulation. It is this practice of rejoicing. So engage in that. And Geshe said, in terms of getting the full benefits of rejoicing, it's difficult for us to do that. Why is that the case? Because of our previous negativities and the obstacles that arise associated with that. Yeah. Yeah. So just reminding you of the story here, of the story of the great king who invited the Buddha and the Sangha assembly to partake of meals and provided them with very nice offerings and so forth. And then there was the beggar woman outside who thought, oh, how wonderful the offerings that the king made to the Buddha that day. May I one day be able to do that. Because the king's intention was impure, but the woman's intention was completely pure, even just through rejoicing. When the king told the Buddha to dedicate to whoever's had accumulated the most merit that day, he dedicated it to the woman because of the power of her rejoicing.
어떻게 간디 야치 모래 소소 배려시 주도야 말에 되는 게와 강가 소소 토스마 스테 야치 모래.
So she didn't spend a penny. Just think about that. She didn't spend a penny, but because her intention was pure and because it was a really completely heartfelt rejoicing, the merit that she accumulated was greater than the one who actually made the offering.
어다 든디를 따와 있는 가르좀 미그 토단 좀 벌린데라 했더니 야생절 배마들 가센티 대지 강가지서 요로시나 여와서도 도야 계속 좀 간디.
So what a great profit that we can come to if we pay attention to the good things in the world, see all of those beings who are engaging in activities to help others, and we really sincerely rejoice in that.
여와 듣게도 소소를 뚜바 터가 있는 소소가 자상하지 나머지 더그래. 아니 뚜바 녀바 있는 아니 차송도 그래서는 오다체 진도와스.
Toba soso le mangayana gacha gyapshu soso dangchipa yana gacha gya. So Geshe said that he's not sure if this is meant to be taken literally, but there is a saying that if you rejoice in a person who has superior realization to yourself, you get 50% of the merits. And if you rejoice in a being who has the same level of realization as yourself, you get 100% of the merits. You're not sure that you have to take that extremely literally, but that's kind of the gist of the practice. At the end of the day, really, there's only benefit to be gained from this practice. So it is something that is truly wonderful. So we will set aside our discussion of the King of Prayers here, and we will turn for a moment to in praise of dependent arising. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, that's a needle.
Which is interesting by each other. Tambalana, Mijawati, Javan is rich, Domba, Tialand, Shuluka, Tombo, and Dosara.
And
You take Gavachina, but they are married to Kunji, 20 to Bateji, Javan, you are looking in Dosara.
So, in terms of what we've completed, like the first two verses of the text, so just find those. Sorry. Okay. The first two verses of the text. Hugh speaks on the basis of seeing. This makes him a knower and teacher, unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. Whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is... Oh, okay. The root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance.
So that in the traditional can you but Halevitanic
And in terms of the second verse, whatever degenerations there are in the world, Geshe said this is a particularly important verse, and it is something that is really powerful if we think about it. Lots of deep meaning. It is actually said that this verse can express all of the 12 links of dependent arising, if one thinks about it. And we also talked about dependent arising as expressed in the various scriptures, for example, the Sublime Continuum, the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Pramana Vartika, and so forth. And we talked about dependent arising presented differently as a set of cause and effect and so forth. So many different ways to understand this. So we come to verse number 3. How can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? So an intelligent person, so this means a person endowed with some wisdom. How could they fail to comprehend that? It means a person who has some wisdom, they will understand the importance of dependent arising in the teachings. So a person who is intelligent, a person with wisdom, they will be able to understand that dependent origination is the essential point of the teaching, because this is the path through which happiness can be achieved. And so out of the 84,000 teachings, in other words, the limitless teachings of the Buddha, this is like the very essential point, this point of dependent origination. So out of the first, second, and third turning ups of the wheel, all of the many teachings of the Buddha, we could say that the crux of those teachings, that the main one is this teaching of dependent arising, through which one can abandon all that must be abandoned, such as suffering, and through which one can achieve that ultimate happiness. The seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So if you do not have the knowledge of this, you will not be able to understand it, but we must develop this knowledge. Yeah. So whether one is an intelligent or wise person or not, we have to discern this ourselves, right? Like no one's going to tell you that. So in terms of dependent arising, we understand that part of what the Buddha is saying here is that every sort of appearance that we see, every phenomena that we could think of, it arises due to the appropriate causes and conditions. It cannot arise in the absence of causes and conditions. And there are sort of many coarser and more subtle presentations of that teaching. There's a way of dividing the Buddha's teachings into two principal categories, into the category of the view and the category of conduct. And here we see once again the importance of dependent arising. It's the view of dependent origination and the conduct of non-harmfulness. So the view is that dependent arising. So when we speak about dependent origination, right, are there different types of dependent origination? And if there are, what would those different types of dependent origination be? And so the first of these, which is the easier to understand, and which is something that probably most people would be able to accept, is the dependent arising of cause and effect. Then the dependent arising of dependent designation. The cha dang cha she. And then the dependent arising of dependent designation. And so in addition to these, Geshe said there are many other types of dependent arising as well, right? That's not an exhaustive list. So when we say dependently designated, how do we understand that? We can say designated on the whole of its parts, designated on the coming together of its parts. Designated on the basis of a dependent relationship, right? A symbiotic relationship. And so if we think about these different types of dependent origination, what we're doing is we're kind of creating a map within our mind that is going to help us navigate this topic.
Yeah, that's all.
Huh? So by way of an example, some people say that big marporwa, that big red fruit of the tree. That big red fruit of the tree. That big red fruit of the tree, just from that sort of example or image, we can understand several parts of dependent arising. So the fruit of the tree, we understand that the fruit of the tree, we understand that also the tree is arising from a seed. So we can understand from the seed to the tree to the fruit, this is the dependent arising of cause and effect. The big red fruit, right, based upon its redness and its sides, we are saying it is a particular type of a fruit based upon those characteristics. So that is the dependent arising of dependent designation. Yeah, marbolabay. Did you say red? I did. I did say red. And so Geshe said that there's also a kind of dependent arising that depends upon different types of characteristics. For example, we can only designate big on the basis of there being something smaller. So that type of dependent designation, dependent arising, is also there. So if we sort of think by way of examples of like the various types of dependent arising, we'll be able to come more easily to an understanding. And also we can understand that any phenomena whatsoever is designated only on the basis of this coming together of these various causes and conditions. It does not arise independently. It does not exist inherently from its own side. So if you think of the small mala, the small rosary that Geshe is holding in his hand, we think that there is a mala that is existing that we can designate as existing from its own side, right? That seems almost evident. If someone were to ask what's in his hand, what's in Geshe's hand, you would say there's a mala in his hand, right? But what if we were to break it down a little bit and we were to question that assumption that there's this inherently existent rosary? What if we were to parse out the individual beads? Could you point to one of those beads and say that's a rosary, that's a rosary, that's a rosary? No, you wouldn't be able to do that. And so that assumption also of what is he holding in his hand, Geshe said between his fingers there's only 2 beads of the rosary. So if you want to be really literal about it, he's not holding the rosary or the mala actually. He just has 2 beads within his hand.
그래서 어다 드리지는 받자와 이는 가래이나 예다 녀모들이 다 말해 봐도 대처도 공도고 가래 지지 자와 이나 그런 민의 저런 주사지로 하면 되지.
So by going through this process of taking a seemingly kind of stable object and breaking it down to its parts, then any sort of object that arises through the lens of attachment, through the lens of aversion, and so forth, will be able to see that there is no pinpointable solid essence that we can find. There's no findable solid essence, and in this way, we can also see how they lack inherent existence.
다 드리서는 파치 시사선의 대마집에 동안 좋아요 거 was. 아니 대마집에 동인데 또 이마다 거의 돼.
Yeah,
저만 뭐지 저만게 지그레 저ያን 뭐지.
대마주바디.
말이야 되게. 얘도 이네 가리나 또 저마다고 좋아서.
Yeah.
어다대 오나게 좀. 어다 드리지가 치가리나 소소 다 휴진들라 그런 게 짠이 봐야만 돼. 휴진의 소소 세고 봐서요 아마도 그런 게 좀 한번 다 남아서 못 해요.
So we can think about this in a lot of ways, that there is nothing that exists independently pinpointable from the side of the object. We can also think how much of the appearance of that object is something that is arising from the side of our own mind, right? There are many ways to explore that. Argument the colors.
다 그것도 보면 좋았으네. 다요 빼 아주 제일은 알아서 빼나 등아도 때문에 되게 왔어. 하고서 때문에 되게 가는 알아서 때문에 포기는 시작하게 된 때문에 포기는 지금 건들 생각도 놓아 되시고요.
So let's take another example. Think that you are in a movie theater watching a movie. You are gazing towards the screen, and it seems like the images of the film are emanating from the surface of that screen, right? It seems like that's where the images of the film are coming from.
Yes, 다 이나요 때문에 포기 사야기 때문에 무슨 게네테 소속이 되는 잘라지요. was 되는 것도 was.
But we know that actually the source of it, at least in the old days, right? It's not from that screen, from that canvas of the screen at all. In fact, the image of the movie is coming from a projector, which is actually behind you.
하고서를 어다 치가리 이나 야가도 중앙도 멤버도 강가로 나로서 세고 봐서자로 마도 된모지. 그런
And so with this example, we can understand that whatever appearance we see, whether it is something good, bad, pleasant, or unpleasant, it is that perception, right? That image of it is not arising from the side of the own object, but so much of it is created by our mind.
And so
we have to, as much as possible, see the role that our mind has in creating the appearance of that object that we apprehend. So in terms of seeing how the view of dependent arising and the conduct of non-harmfulness or ahimsa fit together, we can see how if we want to experience happiness and non-harmfulness, we need to be able to give that to others. We understand that our happiness arises from others. So if we want to create the causes to be able to have good reactions from others, we understand that we start with ourselves by showing them a smile, by saying kind words to them, and so forth. And so we understand that there's a dependent arising there, right, of cause and result. Like if we show a nice expression to people, then they will reflect that back to us. So this shows how, right, that conduct of benefiting others of non-harmfulness is also related to that dependent arising. So the temporary happiness and the ultimate happiness, the cause of all of this, is something that we hold in our hands. So understanding this, then we should strive accordingly.
어다 때 주고 또 고갈래 갈래 뭐 용기 생각도 DS 시에는 돈 들어요. 그래서 그냥 뭐 용기 왔어.
And don't worry if you didn't understand everything about dependent arising just from this presentation. We have many shlokas, many verses to go in this text, and we will be revisiting dependent arising again and again as we proceed.
또 신자고 단계 때린 가서 야와 자산하고 유산하고 때 내가 가시는 거 스테이지에서 뭐 그거 알았어.
So we have this basis, right, of a few different types and examples of dependent arising. So using that as like the basis or the foundation, then we can build our understanding with further exploration.
다음 가서 알레 돈 보게 와도 뭐 이해는 좋아요는 저한테 그래. 저면은 가서 세리. So
we will now dedicate the merits of the session. And if you need to go after that, please do. And then after that, we'll take questions and answers. And maybe if there's not so many questions, we'll do a story or something like that. Yeah. And so Geshe said between the stories and the questions are the more important. Changju zemju rimbo je maje panam jeju je chewa nyamba meba yong gone bondu bewa resho tongi tawa rimbo je maje panam jeju je chewa nyamba meba yong Gone gondo pewa shou Jambel pao jita jamba don Kundo zambo deyon de jinde De da gungi jesu da lo jir Gewa de da tamche radungo Ndusu shebe gewa tamche gi Ngowa gara chodo ngaba de Dagi gewe zawa di gungyong Zambo chuji rado ngowa May the sun of happiness shine without differentiation on all 6 types of beings within samsara. And the cause of that result being able to come about, may every single being, every human being, show each other kindness. So we'll pause there. Just let me turn on the volume. So if there are questions, okay. Oh, sorry. Turn my volume on. There we go. All right, please go ahead. Any questions?
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. A comment, really. I have a beautiful woolen rainbow hoodie from Nepal, and every time I wear it, somebody smiles how much joy it brings to them. And I rejoice in that because it gives me an opportunity to share smiles with other people.
Ko tulok menjawa chikure tulok di ninje po resla ne mimambo gane dene ko jesu rang karin sana gyu chung chung ki chikla tene mi jenda gasem chik yongi rese kidwa.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so Geshe said, yes, like based upon one small thing or one small cause, rejoicing in the happiness that brings to others. Absolutely something we can rejoice in.
This way.
Oh, and also, many different ways and things that we can rejoice in. Yeah. Is there any other questions? I think I saw Deki Lee's hand up a minute ago. Go ahead, Deki Lee.
다이어리.
I think you're muted, or there's some reason we're not hearing you. Is it just me? Can other people hear her?
No,
Yeah, I can't hear her at all.
she's not muted, but we're not hearing you, Dekili.
Hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Yeah,
Speaker plugged in. Okay.
no worries.
The question that's coming up is, in the beginning of the talk, we talked about cyclic existence and this deep disgust really in being stuck in that again and again. Wouldn't happiness be a cause for cycling in samsara? Like the wish for happiness, and there's so much, and oh, you want to be more happy. We just talked about happiness is are we
Yeah,
really
no, there's a
wanting
paradox there for sure.
or is that a cause for cycling?
Yeah, yes, let me ask that. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Nganso the go to the nganso korwa gi korwa da bo chik yangsi drone nganso tang che chiko gires na di magos da bo chik rwa. Nganso yang dewa guna dewa gi gyu chik sa go gires dus chik la gires dende samlo thana dewa di sorwa kibo di nganso korwa dea gi gyu da bo chik chagi omare bes dene dewa di samlo thane dene nganso korwa dea gi ne so chik chagi omare besa
me ta te chiesanga ngazo ya geshe dia te ngazo hakozare ani no ta mombo chiga tene pena shivu chungi na shivu ndi na yo na shivu chungi ka le na
yeah
o ta pe shewa shima nga ha do me kompo thon na de de tani juju chene ga de de ina
yeah
ani ko ale ya ko yin lo ya gambares.
So Geshe said, like, you're right in a way, and he's breaking this down by speaking about the three scopes of the Lam Rim. So the person in the small scope of a limited capacity, right? He or she is practicing, engaging in virtue, thinking that I want to have a higher rebirth as a human or in the God, in the Deva realms. And so actually, yes, from that perspective, they're actually collecting causes to be happy within samsara, right? So they're actually collecting causes for samsara from that perspective.
This way, o ta te zo ji sena shivu chungi zo ji ta lo na le sheke da pe azu ja ba ina ani ko yin lo ya ma do ta ti ta wi jan lo to mu was.
So a person who's merely practicing for that higher rebirth within samsara, then yes, their practice of virtue simply becomes causes to remain happy in samsara. Such positive causes cannot become a cause for liberation. So you're correct there.
This way, o ta te isa ta ngazo ta tembo de ya ma re tene ta wi de wa sa ni ne to pore so tembo ya ma re te ja yu ya ma re tene ina yo ka se to ko no ta to de to ne pa.
So as an antidote to that, what we have to try to do is to try to bring forth a mind that strives towards the bliss, the happiness of liberation. Once we create the mind striving towards liberation, then the virtue becomes causes related to that. And so what a particular virtuous activity becomes a cause from is very much related to the sort of motivation and the wish that we have within our mind.
This way, oh, that be another to one wishing at the to kitchen. To get to a independent Jagachi and Java and Yenda talking about Gazetu Vaina. Koto Sasona didn't go to us.
Yeah, how was on?
No, didn't go to
yeah.
What a Tawas on the Maltanish, just some of them, Fuji Samba, Nalakachi, Sonotona, the Mazu Pada, Yavato Masona, Newton, so told to us.
However, if we extend it, Geshe said it's like you can think about a ticket that you're buying to go to a place very far away. And to do that, you need to transfer across a couple of different flights. You need to stop in a few countries and change planes. So if you are seeking that sort of temporary happiness, but also you are having this motivation to reach full enlightenment or to practice the bodhisattva path, then that cause is going to help you to be able to do that. But some of that positive potential is also going to be going to that separation from samsara through that enlightenment.
자소 마세 바데 템세 세르코노도 모알 자니 프로젝트 카데 자치모지요나 데 마말레 바데 아니도 고주마레.
And that's why the motivation and the dedication are so important, right? And why it's emphasized so much, because we know that if we have that motivation and dedication for full enlightenment, then at least a portion, a drop of those merits is going to remain. Just like if you put a small portion of water in the ocean, some of the essence of that water will remain until that ocean dries up.
다 되는 묘자가 진짜 뭐야. 와서 저도 다 돼 있어 가지고 이제 미제 코이시에 동가를 아주 야야지 되어서.
And so that is the reason why we need to kind of repeatedly reflect upon the faults. In other words, the disadvantages of samsara, right? That's really important.
야 모치한테 가서 아주 자바이나 코이절 로돼야 돼.
So why do the causes, the virtuous causes that we accumulate for happiness result as causes within samsara? It's due to habituation, right? We're so habituated with mainly thinking about the situation that we want within samsara, and that's what causes that. So hopefully, Dekili, did that answer your question? It's okay. Okay, great. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
It's with regard to purification. So
Yeah.
just speaking about my own personal practice, but it might be the same with other people. Occasionally, when I do purification practice well, for example, today with Geshe's help, I feel a sense of relief, but most of the time I just feel bad, which means I don't do purification very well. Can Geshe talk about that?
Yeah, dene Dave serna dirwa dikpa jangya gine so chik drona rwa dene samsam perna dering Geshe-la rokpa chene dikpa shaya dene sem kanisla goreti flow ship dabo chaso rwa ine namgin rwa dikpa shaya kola samlotana dene kyosem dine dene ganso semtes chopo chaya mato rwa yapochi chaso gi so chik yongi omares rwa dene di kanes chik samlotan.
Yeah, that is. 야, 대디 버스사는 이제 민지 다 소소 그랬더니 피하라들만 대화하고 거니라. 다들만 대화하고 거니라. 대화샤 자소나.
Yeah.
대화샤 비가라 뒤중에 하고 제자소나.
Yeah.
이니 민지 뜻매를 하고 시.
So Dave, if you're having this experience, what Geshe would advise you and also advise others to do is after you have completed like your 4 opponent powers, right? Or whatever your confession is, that you absolutely must do a visualization of the deity in front of you and receiving the lights and nectars afterwards. That can be very helpful.
야, 뭐뭐지를 뒤때는데 배도 요하네. 서로가. 야, 뜻매를 오다 뒤에서 좀 맞아야도 가보자. 그래서 뭐뭐지 요하네.
And on the basis of that visualization of the deity and receiving those lights and nectars, what this can do is encourage the mind, right? So that we're left with a positive feeling after we complete the practice.
어떤 리워지. 근데 디바샤 비가 거로퍼긴 리브다가 리브 요아포트리 뭐고 요아. 와스 텐들리는 리브 요아포 시만 리브 요아포. 다 들리서는 또 토나고 보게. Another
angle that you could take, Dave, is that you could think about what the results of purification are. What are the results of purification in terms of the benefits of this life and also in terms of the benefits of future lifetimes? And then just think like, through that practice, I've accumulated the causes of those benefits. This might also be a way to kind of enliven the mind after the practice. And also just to remind ourselves that the teaching of the 4 opponent powers, the Buddha himself said that even very grave misdeeds can be purified in this way. And also before his enlightenment, he purified his own misdeeds in this way, and sort of reflecting on that can also bring forth a feeling of confidence. And so if you're having like a heavy feeling or sort of an uneasy feeling after that practice of confession and purification, trying one of these different strategies might be able to mitigate that. As with any practice, thinking about the benefits of what we're doing, right, is a really important thing. Yeah. So Dave, did that answer your question?
Yes, those are 3 things. I think feeling bad it reminds me that this metaphor of poison is helpful, because if I think of poison, if I realize I've eaten something that's poisonous, I just don't feel bad about it. I don't mope, I go and do something about it, so that I have to remember that too, that this is actually completely effective if I do it well, and then there is relief.
The young Samuel Tangiris in the gain that chick Duke Sagan that was Samuel Tangiris, Pechik Law, so on. Then these Samuel Tangas and also Duke Chick Sanning at the gas, Lulu de Gains Mares, or not Duke Nipaduksha Mepaso, not chick Chepayes, the double chick Samuel Tanana, then he sent it Lulu younger child to get it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so if you eat an antidote that is more powerful than the poison, what greater feeling of relief is there than that, in a way, right? Yeah, what greater relief is there than that?
Yeah.
I think
Yes, but absolutely, it's true. I think I saw Donna's hand, but if there's anyone else, I can't see everybody's image in my screen at once. It kind of rotates between people. So if someone else is first, but otherwise, Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I hope I articulate myself with this sort of common question. If I don't, please bear with me. It was relating to the discussion on karma and our intention to kill, and the importance of intention, right? And motivation. And the discussion you had on if someone compels a soldier to kill, like the distribution of karma. And this is really interesting, because coming from Sri Lanka, where there was a civil war, where we had soldiers going out who would go to the temple and not want to kill because they were Buddhists, but then the leaders were asking them to kill, and the political leaders, etc. There was lots of interesting debate going on. And I guess this also made me think of a conversation I had with my daughter yesterday, because we went to visit, my daughter sponsors children. She sponsors a pig in a sanctuary called Toby. And it's a sanctuary that rescues farm animals and animals that were destined for slaughter. So when she went and visited her pig and saw it was like a dog and petted and it had feelings, we had this conversation about, she got really upset saying, like, why do people keep killing these animals? And we had a discussion on karma, because we brought it back to Buddhism, right? And she said, so the people killing the pigs, will they have bad karma? But if we give money to the people killing the pigs, if we incentivize people to kill the pigs because we want to eat their flesh, I guess it's an attachment to flesh, then that brings us karma as well. And then it reminded me of a conversation I had.
Sorry, Donna. Sorry, just 1 sec. I just want to clarify. So incentivizing, you mean by people purchasing the meat, they're incentivizing the person who's directly killing the animal, right? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. Please bear with me. Sorry, this is long. And then that took me back to discussions that we have in my family. When I was growing up in a very Theravada household, where like my rich aunties would say, well, I'm not the one killing the animal, I'm giving money, and it's usually the domestic staff who go and they'll get the bad karma, not us. I'm sorry I went on a while, but I felt it was very relevant to a discussion I was having and struggling to explain to my daughter yesterday.
Yes, no, and we'll get Geshe-la's ideas on that, but just what you're saying culturally, Donna, I suspect that some of this comes from the fact that actually in the Vinaya, it's not prohibited for monks and nuns to eat meat. But what you do find is that in the Mahayana Sutras, there's a lot of discussion about the drawbacks of eating meat. So it might just be, they might say that just because like a scriptural, literal interpretation of it, right? But I'll put your question to Geshe-la as best I can. Nanso ngama Geshe-la chik sung rwa dene mapun dinso mami dinso mi chik se go gire dua mami se gidopa halepe shuk champo menana chik sena dene konso kandisla gire so chupele zopa chik chatsangwa chik sagi umares dabo chik lapsa so rwa dene morangi pumo dang yamdu konso di palpa gi sungkyop chesa Ontario Pagbagi Sungsho Chesa Chikyo Roa Namgin Sha Partanyagi Pagbadin So Conso Nyargi Res Roa Masayagi Chedu Roa Dene Morongi Pumo Kechitrison Roa Nanso Sha Sagen Roa Serik Sonkang Pesha Tela Tene Di Pagbasai Giguda Chagi Omarebes Dene Conso Sokche Sayagi le dapochik sagio maribes di niche ane sumpa di Sri Lanka gi nanglolaya roa denet mami mambochik senin jogi medus inet mapandin so that tene parchik setzares di zoda mazo chikche ane yang mi mambochik roa jungi nangla shas inji sacho biomares mepa yensang roa deninga katuk Semchen di segi mezanga le shukchamboragi umares tawachidua. Di kola samso kandeyo.
다 대단히 대미 서로 대지 대다 쓰고 뭐요. 다 메시아트 대가로레스. 우선 대화면나 연다 오해 지내라 세게 도서나. 소소게 세바이나 우선 대화면에 문도나. 예바 차소용 거요 말레스.
So if you do not, so in the case of the soldier, if the soldier does not have a wish to kill, but they are compelled to do so against their own will, they accumulate a negative karma, but not the complete karma of killing, whereas the superior who issued the order does. So for an action to be complete, the intention needs to be complete. So if the soldier did not have the intention of themselves wishing to do that, there is a negative karma related to that killing, but it is not a complete karma of killing. So the full karma would actually go to the general who issued the order for the killing, or if above him or her there was like a politician. So whoever issued that original order. So Geshe can say that with certainty in terms of how it works. The other one, Donna, you shared kind of a lot of things. So Geshe wasn't sure, but I think just let me say the thrust of your question is, by buying meat, what kind of karma are we creating? Do we get the karma of killing, right?
Yeah, because we are incentivizing, I guess, because we want the flesh. But I think the way my aunties put it was like, okay, it's only our domestic staff who are going to get the bad karma, not us. As a child, they used to tell me, because they were.
So katuk semshendi masena morangi ani chikrwa nanso yokpodin so partane de ne konso segyo sang le zopadi konso sagyo rimato nanso sagyo mare ini nanso yang shanyo na yang shamanyo ne de ne konso lega medro gito de ne nanso so chigile sagyo maresa. So you do not, once again, in this case, you do not get the complete karma of killing, but that doesn't mean that you're not accumulating negative karma. You are still accumulating negative karma, but it's not a complete karma.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
But I think what you're asking, John, is do they become like the general then? Because you send your servant out to kill the sheep or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or you're giving money to someone. But then and these debates going on, even in the war debates. In the war, there were lots of debates around the soldiers. Yeah, it's the same thing, I guess.
So yopo lukdi sego gires karisena ngasa gires deni so mapenda bochagires. So Geshe said, yes, that is the case, but in the case of the meat that we're eating in our kitchens, it's a bit different from that. We're not saying it's not negative, but from that sense of completion, because we're not issuing an order to somebody to directly kill that animal, right? So it's there's a bit more of a separation. Your argument would hold if, say, you give some money to somebody and you're like, kill your cow and then chop it up and so I can eat it. Then you get that complete karma. That would be the case where you would.
Yes, so
So when you buy meat in the shop, definitely you're accumulating a fault, right? There's a negativity there, but we, according to the teachings on karma, we could not say that's a complete karma of killing, because like between you and the slaughterhouse and the person who makes the order and the distributor and the person who ships it there, there's many degrees of separation between you and that. So hopefully that answered your question, Donna.
Thank you. I will continue to have these conversations with my daughter. I appreciate, and thank you to everyone for putting up with my really long explanation and conversation.
No worries, no worries. Any other question?
None from Facebook today.
None from Facebook today. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we had the time change. Maybe folks are tired from yesterday. All right, so I guess we're at the end of our questions, Medusa.
Yeah, so
Geshe would like to close then, since we have 10 minutes. We'll close with just a brief story related to karma, related to cause and effect. Yeah. So this story relates, Geshe said, to separating individuals from groups. And so the story is like, if there is an individual who's part of a group, so for example, you can think of a monastery. So if there's a member of the Sangha in a monastery who's doing something wrong, then absolutely you should criticize it. But if you criticize the whole groups of monks at the monastery, or if you criticize all of the people of that particular identifiable group, there's a danger there. So this story illustrates that. But before we tell the story, Geshe wants to say, if you clearly see somebody doing something wrong, whether they're ordained or not, you're absolutely allowed to directly tell them that. Like if you see them directly engaged in wrongdoing, you can say something. So not to discourage people from that. But when we sort of paint with a broad brush or criticize an entire institution, because within that institution, for example, the monastery, there's many people in there, some of them who may be very, very good people doing good things, then there's a danger to that kind of like universal criticism. So Geshe said this story relates to two lay people, and these two lay people, they were part of the staff that would help to bring the food to Nalanda Monastery for the monks. So Nalanda in ancient India. Sorry. So they were not bringing food to the monks. They were begging food from the monks. And so there were two beggars. And they So the first of these beggars, he would go and beg the food from the kitchens before it was offered to the monks. Yeah. And so when he went to the kitchen and begged the food, sometimes he would not receive it because the people did not want to give him the food before it was offered to the monks. The second beggar, he had a different way of thinking about it. What he would do is wait until all of the food was offered to the assembly of monks, and then he would beg for something. So because of this, right, and because of not understanding the etiquette behind it, the first beggar who would beg from the kitchen before the food had been served and never received anything, he thought, this is an absolutely terrible monastery. And not only that, but they're biased. They always give my friends something to eat and they've never given me anything. And he developed a really deep aversion against the monastery. The second beggar who begged after the food was offered, he would always receive food. So he developed only kind thoughts towards the monastery and the monks in accord with that. And so the beggar who was able to receive the food, he developed this affinity with the monastery, and he thought, at some point in the future, if I'm ever able to obtain any wealth, I'm going to repay the kindness of this offering, of this monastery, by making offerings. The first beggar, because he never received any food, and because of that aversion, he thought, if I ever get a little bit of money or power, I'm going to do something to get revenge on this monastery. And he was holding that thought within his mind. Yeah. So Geshe said the order of the story is a bit different, but he likes to leave the good thing for the end. So he's going to tell you what happened to the beggar who had that aversion towards the monastery first. Yeah. So then the one who had this aversion for the monastery and was plotting his revenge, one day he had to set out on the road. And then at some place beside the road, like under a tree or something, he fell asleep. But because he fell asleep close to the road and he sort of changed his position as he was sleeping, his leg ended up pointing into the road, and his leg was run. They didn't have cars in those days, so it was run over by like a bullock cart or something like that. It was run over by a cart. Yeah. And so that's an example of how a powerful karma, in other words, his extreme aversion towards the monastery, brought forth a result that was experienced in that very life, right? That very life was that his leg was severely injured under the bullock cart. And the being, the beggar, who was always praising the monastery and developed those positive intentions towards it, when he fell asleep under a tree, because of the merits of his positive intention, wherever the sun moved in the sky, the shade of the tree would always shelter him, just like it does for holy beings. And so all of the townspeople, it was a small place, they sort of observed the situation of the two beggars, and so all of them were aware of it. Yeah. And so observing this, then all of the townspeople in the market, they thought that their place was without leadership. So they said, we need to find like a wise and knowing advisor to be our leader. And they said, well, there's this person who is sleeping, and wherever he is sleeping, the shade of the tree is always protecting him, no matter where the sun is. So this is obviously a person of extensive merit, and he would perhaps be a good knowing advisor to become our leader. Yes, yes. And so then he was eventually invited to be the leader of that land.
세대를 내서 세대를 되면 이거 was.
So this story just illustrates how even not necessarily physical or verbal actions, but also the thoughts of the mind can become powerfully wholesome or powerfully unwholesome. And in the case when those actions are powerful, they can bring forth the results even in that very same life.
뭐다 들리지 생각도 이제 개와서 이제 디바서 아세아고 니라고 지금 돈이 뭐야 뭐도 was 대지 아버지나 들은 것도 뭐도 is.
So if we know sort of how to direct our mind away from what is unwholesome towards what is wholesome, we can accumulate many virtues even just like that.
뭐다 대지 로진 공인이라고 지금 장인이라고 생각이네 이자 다 랜드는 이치사 다 들리지 저도 그래.
So it's actually based upon these kind of like stories, which are more like actual histories from the scriptures that we can develop understanding and faith in cause and effect or karma.
드니 어떻게 아버지나 뒤자시나 지 용거를 레레서 대우 배트자야 말 대처 그래서 가르쳐가.
But we don't want to develop a fatalistic understanding of karma, which is kind of an understanding of like, whatever happens to me, oh, there's nothing I can do. It's just kind of my karma, right? We don't want to have like that passive understanding of karma either.
레서는 샤와세요. 샤와세는 샤바 보칠 근데 그야 이제 샤와 야보셔도 많이 소소라 받는 맞다는.
Karma means actions. Actions have a doer. Who's the doer? The doer of the actions is ourselves. So whether we're accumulating positivity or negativity and according the results, that depends on us. So we are not a powerless person in this picture.
어떤 니비티서 가리나 건도사서 와서 마고백이 챈 니나 샤와 샤마이나 가리요도 많이서 소소라 받는 너무 잡아나 보시래. 미나시나.
Whatever has happened in the past is in the past, and we understand that. But in terms of the future, what direction we start to go, in terms of what habituations and propensities we build up, this is something that is in our hands.
So thank
you very much. That ends Geshe's story or the history that he wanted to share with you. So we'll say bye to everybody now.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Bye. Thank you, Geshe and Venerable Kendra. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.